It's around $20 billion a year that banks make off overdraft. It could be upwards of 17,000%. If you go buy a cup of coffee for $5 and pay a $34 fee and pay that back a few days later, it's a tremendous amount of APR.
Making less than $115,000 a year is actually considered low income.
So my name is Ashley Stalliano. Currently, I work in customer service full-time, and part-time I work at a cafe serving drinks, hostess.
Ashley is 29 years old. She's living with her dad in San Francisco while working multiple jobs during the week. She explains the challenges of working a 40-hour job at minimum wage.
One person working a minimum wage job could not survive and afford all the basic needs of transportation, shelter, food. It would be really hard.
Well, there was a study done that fascinated me that was like, it's better to be at the top of the bottom than at the bottom of the top economically.
This is Alyssa Court. She is the executive director of the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. In 2018, she wrote the book Squeezed: Why Our Families Can't Afford America.
Well, to me, it was both an economic squeezing or vising of people's lives where people are living paycheck to paycheck, working contingently, and it was also the squeezing, the existential squeezing of their spirit. So it's a psychological and a more almost philosophical state that people are living in now.
The pandemic has exposed an ongoing issue: the economic inequalities of Americans.
It's highlighted those inequalities. It's highlighted that lack of daycare. It's highlighted that lack of working public education in a lot of districts, and it's highlighted the fact that we don't have adequate medical care.
The last time I had health insurance was, oh my God, I'm already forgetting. I'm trying to think. I think it was 2 years ago I had health insurance, but since then, I just haven't had it.
In 2018, 27.5 million people did not have health insurance according to the U.S. Census. That number today is expected to be even higher.
And I think sometimes, especially, people my age, it's like you think, oh, we're invincible, we don't need health care. But then something happens.
And that's what happened. Before COVID, Ashley came down with a severe case of pneumonia.
I didn't know what to do because I was like, I don't know who I go to.
Ashley was afraid of going to the emergency room, so after a quick Google search, she ended up at the San Francisco Free Clinic, a nonprofit that serves as a safety net for those without insurance.
So they were able to, help me out and actually saved my life. So, that is one of the nice things. And I forever, am grateful to them, that there are, organizations, nonprofits like that out there.
Ashley then found a full-time job that offered full benefits for the first time ever in her career.
Finally, I passed my 90 days and I got my benefits, and then 2 months later, that's when,
Effective today, requiring all counties to close their indoor activities, their indoor operations in the following sectors: restaurants.
We were laid off, as many Americans were laid off. So I lost all of those, and I missed I think there was like a 30-day mark where you can get health care, and I missed that 30-day.
Since being laid off, Ashley has found 2 jobs and tested positive for COVID-19. Thankfully, her symptoms were little to none. Ashley's story is very similar to millions of Americans across the country, especially essential employees.
It's almost like there's a relationship to the people that we need most, that we treat them the worst in this country. So I think the use of the word essential is almost Orwellian. It's like they've always been essential. We only recognize now they're essential, but we don't treat them like that.
Throughout the pandemic, hazard pay has been offered to help those on the front lines, like grocery store workers. Some employers have even offered hazard pay indefinitely. But is it enough? Alyssa's research explains.
I talked to somebody in Austin who worked at Trader Joe's. He makes $14.90 an hour, and he has literally nothing in his bank account, and he works full time. In the Bay Area, for instance, in some of these coastal areas, making less than $115,000 a year is actually considered low income. So that is why a teacher who you'd say, oh, $60,000, they're middle class. No, they're not in San Francisco. So they are having to do all this secondary labor as well.
Jason Wilk, founder and CEO of Dave.
As Americans live paycheck to paycheck, one hidden obstacle that can easily be overlooked is banking. Each year, banks rake in around $20 billion just off of overdraft fees.
Most banks will charge you up to $100 per day of overdraft. So if you have several transactions in a row, they'll charge you $34 for each of those subsequent transactions, up to 3 per day. If you go buy a cup of coffee and then go buy a tank of gas, you could be paying upwards of $70 to $100 of overdraft fees just for getting those everyday essentials. And we thought that was just completely crazy.
Those ridiculous fees that banks try to trip people up with, there should be forgiveness for these things. It's obscene. But I think, we need to put pressure on and sort of shame financial institutions a little, especially, and perhaps use this crisis as a cudgel to explain that this is the wrong thing to do, to be benefiting from people's misery in a time when nobody can, or almost nobody can, earn what they do normally.
According to a recent New York Times article, bank users have been afraid banks would zap their much-needed $600 stimulus check. Several banks had temporarily paused their overdraft status for at least a month.
When you have nowhere else to turn, you'd rather pay the $34 fee to your bank, because otherwise you're stuck at the gas station or you're going to bed hungry.
I have had issues with overdraft fees in the past, and I didn't notice until I had checked my bank account one day, and then I had like $175 overdraft.
From one small charge to paying hundreds in fees to get back to zero could put an individual behind for months or even years.
Borrow some money from a friend, to put that in, and I didn't even really, I didn't know too much about overdraft fees. I didn't know that was a thing until it happened to me.
So what is the solution for all of this?
Getting people more actively engaged in governance. That's, voting differently, obviously, but also things like participatory budgeting, where people go to meetings for their local government, and they sort of ask for the things that they need. Bigger things that we really need. We need, obviously, paid pregnancy leave. The pandemic has been just how much we need universal daycare in general.
According to the U.S. Census, 13 million U.S. workers hold more than one job, either because of extra income or to gain more experience.
People who are making under $50,000 a year, they're working twice as hard as the average person to get by. They're finding second jobs. They're having to hustle a lot harder than the average person. And so I do think that if you are working a full work week, you should have access to those basic core tenets to get by without having to go take on second and third shifts somewhere.
I think they deserve to be able to live a comfortable life and be able to afford housing, form of transportation, food, their basic needs.
One should be able to survive a basic lifestyle off of a single full-time job, but in many areas it's nearly impossible. For us to get there, though, we must start having an open and honest conversation right now.
I want people to not blame themselves, and the motto I've used is, it's not your fault. And I think there's a lot of shame and stigma, especially for middle-class people. There's a culture of keeping things about money private. People will talk about all sorts of very personal things in public, but they won't talk about the fact that they're living paycheck to paycheck. And if they do, they're really ashamed of it. And I think we need to have more open conversations, and I think we need to realize that it's not our fault.
Hey everyone, Cody Broadway here. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out the NBCLX YouTube channel. Be sure to click here for more videos, and also click here to subscribe to join the NBCLX community.